Eternal Darkness is one of my favorite games on the Gamecube. I played it numerous times since its release, and I just replayed it for some perfectly spooky streams for October. But is my love just nostalgia, or is it actually good? I've talked about Eternal Darkness for a long time, and I found on many occasions that I've had to defend it. There isn't a large group of people that hate the game that I'm aware of. Still, it certainly doesn't get the love other similar franchises from the time get, and there are always a few buts thrown in when it does. Eternal Darkness: Sanity's Requiem is a horror game released in 2002 for the Nintendo GameCube, developed by Silicon Knights and published directly by Nintendo. At the time, Nintendo had contracted Silicon Knights with both Shigeru Miyamoto and Satoru Iwata credited as producers. It began development on the Nintendo 64, like several early GameCube titles, and it was moved to the GameCube as a launch title. It was first teased in 1999, but they were still showing it off for the Nintendo 64 at E3 in 2000, right before GameCube's reveal, which would follow that same year at Space World. So while they may have been trying to keep things under wraps, it explains why they missed the mark for launch if any development on the Nintendo 64 was still happening in late 2000. Before I get any further into this, I better address the elephant in the room. Is anyone actually saying the game is terrible? Eternal Darkness was critically acclaimed at launch. It was the first mature rated title published by Nintendo and was just slightly beaten out by Resident Evil for the first horror title on the GameCube. But despite the masterpiece that the Resident Evil remake is and was, it was old news by then. People were more than ready for Eternal Darkness by the second half of 2002. IGN gave it the Editor's Choice Award and won several other awards at the time and since. But head over to Twitch, even during peak spooky season, and absolutely no one is playing Eternal Darkness, either in its own category or just in retro, me not included. But check for Resident Evil 2 or Silent Hill 2 and the difference is obvious. Give something awards all you want, if it doesn't have staying power with the general audience, it doesn't really matter in the end. While it can be hard to get accurate numbers for these things, Eternal Darkness might have only sold less than 500,000 copies worldwide. Compare that to Resident Evil 2 selling 3 million copies globally just at its initial launch. Over the years, I've heard plenty of appreciation for Eternal Darkness. I've seen it on lists for most excellent games, greatest GameCube games, and best horror titles. Still, no one actually seems to be playing it, nor do I remember many people playing it when it was new. Usually I hear someone say it was a unique experience that they'd be unlikely to play again. Eternal Darkness was unique in many ways, but I keep comparing it to Resident Evil and Silent Hill because it obviously was cut from the same cloth, so to speak. However, their success gives some critical context to the point of this video. Eternal Darkness is a horror title, but I wouldn't call it survival horror because of all the items and abilities available to you. Still, it has some of the same concepts: find keys, solve a little puzzle, fight zombies and monsters, wash, rinse, and repeat. But I'm getting ahead of myself. You start the game as Alex Roivas, who, after a horrible nightmare, awakes to a phone call. Once arriving at the Roivas mansion, she is confronted by one of the worst detectives, who basically nonchalantly shows her that her grandfather has been brutally murdered.
Showing me this. Can't you check dental
terrible
records
cop.
or something?
There's not much to see.
What's wrong with
Just
you?
this bloody husk on the ground. We could have prepared you for that at least a little bit.
I'm sorry. It's my job, lady. You're the only living relative, and no, we can't check dental records. There's no head. None of this makes sense. There's no sign of intrusion.
Not surprisingly, the police are of no help, so she begins looking for clues around the mansion as to what could have possibly happened to her grandfather. Alex stumbles onto the Tome of Eternal Darkness, and a page that tells a story about the end of humanity. From there, the game unravels a story that follows a connected group of people. Some are directly related to the Roivas family through history, as they each have their own run-in with the Tome of Eternal Darkness and their run-in with the Ancients. In the first chapter, you play as Pius, a Spartan soldier who stumbles upon the tome and 3 essences of each of those Ancients. You then get to pick which one you take, deciding how the game plays out. The Ancients are heavily inspired by Lovecraft's cosmic horror, with a bit of various ancient religions. These gods each have their own traits, personality, and mystical alignments. For example, Chaturga is about physical strength, Xelothoth is pure insanity, but also seems to have high intelligence, and Ulyaoth focuses purely on the cosmos, magic, and dimensional planes. Depending on which alignment you pick with Pius, the game changes slightly. While enemies of every alignment are present in every playthrough, which one you align with changes which enemy type is the dominant one, and some other sequencing of events. Of course, the cutscenes and general story beats will change a bit. For example, you'll not see Pius talk with Chaturga if you chose Zelototh initially. After that initial chapter, you'll play as a different character each time and slowly learn more about the story and the game's mechanics. You'll move through time as various characters and visit other locations, though not every story has a unique location, they change over time. So it makes sense from a story perspective. These places have a connection to the ancients and there is no reason there would need to be 12 different locations to explore. As the story evolves, so do these locations and the events held within. Finding the monsters is primarily melee focused and seems much more inspired by Silent Hill than it does Resident Evil. It makes sense too, you're not going to find a semi-automatic during the time of the Spanish Inquisition. So focusing on melee allows more history to be explored than focusing on ballistic weaponry. Eternal Darkness mixes things up by allowing you to focus on specific parts of the monsters to aim your attacks. No just aiming up and hoping it hits a zombie's head. You highlight the body part you want to hit and swing away. If everything goes according to plan, you'll probably chop it off. You will eventually find guns in chapters that take place during periods that had them. They aim the same way as melee weapons, meaning you can easily shoot a monster in the face with a shotgun. They made them work somewhat realistically as well. For example, black powder pistols take a moment to reload and only hold one shot. Though you also have an elephant gun that launches you straight on your butt without any other injury. It's hilarious to try to use. To round out the game is a magic system, which you upgrade throughout the story by finding runes, spell scrolls, and codexes. When you first find a rune, you'll only know what it is once you find the matching codex, and you'll have spells once you find a spell scroll. But you can guess spells using the spell menu, just trying random combos even if you don't know what a rune is. The alignment also plays a part in the spell. If you cast Recover using the red Chaturga rune, you will store health, blue for magic and green for sanity. The ancients and their magic also counter each other in a familiar circle. Red beats green beats blue, and blue beats red. So when you enchant an item, dispel other magic, try to uncover hidden secrets, or summon a monster to fight for you, you need to think of this circle of alignments and how they work against each other. It adds a bit of strategy to the magic, making it more than just a list of spells to rely on. Sure, an enchanted blade is always better than one that isn't. Still, a properly enchanted one against a giant horror is a monster-killing machine. Lastly, at the core level, the gameplay is the same throughout, but each character does have some differences. Our main hero, Alex, has the best of everything: high magic, health, and sanity. Alex also has a lot of stamina and can run a long way before getting winded. But Roberto is weaker and slower, but has his own little touches, for example. One character might be all magic focused and little health, another may have high health and moderate sanity, but just can't use that much magic. It helps keep each chapter a little extra fresh, since not everyone just plays the exact same. And this is where I have to talk about the sanity effects, which really made Eternal Darkness stand out at release. The thing to me that is probably the least exciting part of Eternal Darkness 20 years later. But you can't avoid it either, but I'll get to that part in a bit. The sanity meter serves two aspects in Eternal Darkness. First off, all monsters drain your sanity when they first spot you, and when it reaches 0, they begin to drain your health. In addition, some constantly drain your sanity if you're in the same room with them, so they can be dangerous if your meters are low. Plus, unlike health, there are no ways to protect you from the effects of sanity. You just need to be quick about getting rid of those monsters. If you form a finishing mood, you will regain some sanity. But the big crazy thing is how losing sanity affects you, the player. Low sanity will have a few things happen. Sometimes you'll get some extra cutscenes with Alex and Grandpa where he's less than friendly toward Alex. Sometimes you'll cast a spell or enter a room and your character will suddenly die a gruesome death. But sometimes they decide to mess with you, the player, directly. Things like suddenly saying your save is corrupt or will be deleted, pretending that the Gamecube crashed or that your TV suddenly shut off. There were indeed a few times I thought my Gamecube broke when I first played this when it first came out. So rude. So that's the gist of Eternal Darkness. If you already knew all this, you probably skipped to this spot, and if you didn't, it gave you a good overview of the game, I hope. I feel like Eternal Darkness is one of those games that can be summed up pretty quickly, but can be broken down at length, going over every detail of the magic, different characters, and their story arcs, the monsters, and the ancients. So 20 years later, how does Eternal Darkness Sanity's Requiem actually hold up? As I said at the very beginning, it is one of my favorite games. Still, I definitely realize it could be a more flawless experience. Eternal Darkness, in its attempt to create a really connected universe and timeline of the Roivas family, the tome, and the people around it, you end up revisiting the same places several times. This is a great way to keep everything feeling connected, and I'm sure it was an excellent solution for the developers to save development money and time. Seeing each area either develop or crumble with the passing of time is interesting. Plus, you may notice little rooms or secrets that carry over to a puzzle in a later chapter. But it can be a bit on the bland side to constantly visit the same place 3 or 4 times, and sometimes feels tedious and exhaustive exploring the same ruins. This is not a problem that only Eternal Darkness deals with. In fact, I feel like many horror games can get tiresome when you're walking through the same haunting locale looking for that one clue you missed. So at least Eternal Darkness does have multiple locations, even if you revisit them multiple times. But as they get longer and more extensive, sometimes I wish I wasn't in that same place I was 2 hours ago. It's really awful at the end when you need to visit the underground city twice. It takes forever to get through all these towers and rooms, and it's packed with monsters and then packed with traps. It is so long and tedious, and like many other levels, there is not much of a buffer between the two, so it is way too familiar on top of it. Speaking of those clues you might have missed, this game has some puzzle elements like other similar games from the era. Thankfully for me, it was lighter on the weird puzzles and obtuse clues, and instead focused more on the magic and weapons. A lot of the things you need to solve just involve going to the only unlocked area and finding the next bit you need to move forward. But when Eternal Darkness is vague, it's really vague. One great example is the level when you play the role of an obvious Indiana Jones reference. This area is familiar, but opens up differently than the first time you visit it. The problem is several things you need are hidden in little cobwebs in the corners of random rooms. This requires your handy archaeologist brush to clear the dust away. Super easy to walk past several times. There are others, I'm sure. I certainly remember forgetting things when I originally played it. I would have to walk around blindly until it clicked. Characters look at items you can interact with. Still, if you need to be closer or get distracted, it's very easy to miss a thing tucked in a dark corner or that looks like a part of the background. But I've played this so many times I can generally blow through most of the stories, but it's easy to forget some of the mechanics that rarely get used, such as sneaking and summoning trappers. For example, sneaking is never really needed. You can sneak around trappers, but it's just as easy to shoot them or let them catch you. So toward the end, when it suddenly is wholly required due to an enchanted floor, I completely forgot it might be an option. Those trappers send you to a different dimension, which is rarely threatening. So most of the time, it is easy to leave with very little annoyance, and even better, you can refill your meters. But you can also use them for your benefit once you can summon them. But again, you only do this a few times through all the chapters, so it's easy to overlook it as a solution or completely forget that you need to specifically target the item you want to teleport away.
That's why I had to target it. I kind of forgot that was a thing.
Despite how fun the magic system is, it definitely has some issues. It takes a few chapters to really have anything valuable. It helps with the difficulty curve, but hinders the fun a bit. Eventually, you'll need more potent spells, so you'll need to find a new 5-point chart. It wouldn't be a problem, except you have to literally input every spell with the new circle. Oh boy, is that tedious. And you must do that a second time.
And do like Bank Rock. Red Gormore. And then Pargon or something like that. Where you at? There it is. Pargon. Yeah. So you gotta do that for every single one you currently know. It's so stupid.
You also don't need most of the spells. Sure, you could summon a zombie or a horror to fight other monsters, but it could be more practical. You'll mostly need to use the shield or barrier spell and enchantment for fighting, and the reveal and dispel for most puzzles. You have a magic attack, but you only use that occasionally. More on that in a moment. And then, of course, the other point upgrades. But through most of the game, outside of the shield or healing outside of battle, I stick to 3-point spells, since using most of them in combat takes way too long to cast. Most enemies are completely tolerable. Aim for the head and you'll be fine for almost all encounters. Even the smaller guardians are pretty easy to deal with until there are several of them in one place later on. Not to say you'll never die or can't get overwhelmed, but I always felt Eternal Darkness is well balanced. Fighting is always a good option, but running away in certain circumstances works as well. Plus, you always have protection in healing items from magic. But that all goes out the window when you face the one big boss in the game, the Guardian in the Cathedral. Even after all these years and playthroughs, this fight still annoys me. Even in this recent stream, I was so frustrated because I know how things are supposed to work, but I just couldn't get a single hit on the boss. It makes the boss long, tedious, and just not fun. During the second phase of every Guardian, you're supposed to use a magic attack on the Guardian. No surprise that your puny guns and swords don't hurt this massive monster. The catch is that they keep spawning other monsters, and if they're too close, your magic attack just hits them. You cannot aim your magic attack. You'll also have a very short window to cast the spell, so you can only use a level 3 attack. Back to what I mentioned earlier about magic levels. You gotta line it up just right or the Guardian will block it. It is one of those fights where I always feel so stupid because it's so picky about how close the other enemies are and how much time you have. In the end, it is not a fun or well-designed fight, even if it works according to plan. Most giant boss fights of this genre aren't great, so I haven't held it against the game over the years, but it is what it is.
Got him. Got him. Take that, you stupid crab monster. Hate you. Hate that stupid battle. It's like the one part of this game I absolutely just don't enjoy.
There's absolutely no reason to complete the game all 3 times, which is a significant concept of the game. But it really doesn't matter. Each play changes slightly, but needs to be more to make each time actually feel fresh. The ending is just mildly different, with some different dialogue and a different ancient winning over another. It is for completionists who enjoy the game only. You end up unlocking Eternal Mode, which allows all chapters to be accessed at will, and you can play it with invincibility and infinite magic turned on. Some other tiny things like learning a bit more of the story and what's behind the purple element and Mantarok, but it's far from necessary. One last complaint I could think of is that you do not spend enough time with Alex. You get to do little puzzles with her between chapters, and she is one who finishes out the main story for the ending, but to me she feels completely unexplored. Her grandfather is just as much the main protagonist as she is. He gets his own chapter about the same depth as Alex's stuff, he gets random ghostly cutscenes, and narrates each chapter. I would have loved to find more secret stuff and spooky moments in the mansion with Alex. It would have been my #1 hope for a sequel, to have Alex finally be the main focus. Now on some crusade to continue her grandfather's work to research ancients and keep any demonic forces from crossing into our world. So is Eternal Darkness good? I think so. I tried to be as critical as I could through this and think about what I didn't like after years of saying I love this game. While it has plenty of faults, I don't see it as anything but a fun title that deserves the praise it gets. The main issue is that it sits in such a gray area and never had the right audience. As a horror title, Eternal Darkness is really not that scary. It has a spooky moment here and there and strong horror themes, but you never feel that dread or intensity other titles can evoke, both new and old. It is more of an adventure title, but it is reined in because of the horror elements and the storytelling method. With each chapter, you feel very constrained sometimes, pushing against that genre. It is something I've never really considered before, but replace any of the characters wielding their sword with Link and think of each chapter as a traditional dungeon while you hunt for keys and items, and it's pretty close. But if you've never played Eternal Darkness or tried it once before and you just weren't feeling it, I always suggest giving the game an honest shot. While some elements have aged better than others, and by now the sanity effects are more than spoiled, it's still a captivating experience and an exciting story. The atmosphere and the creativity in Eternal Darkness are lovely. I love all the little bits, from the sound design to the designs of creatures, the autopsy reports you gain from one chapter, and just a lot more.
This abomination, disease, science, blasphemous occult rituals. How can something so dead?
It hasn't aged as nicely as some other Gamecube titles. Coming from the Nintendo 64, you can see some limitations that stuck around. Some areas feel too static, and the character models are a bit stiff. For example, Pius' helmet looks glued to his head and always sticks out to me, but still a good looking game, especially when properly upscaled. Just maybe turn up the darkness a bit, because while I appreciate the dark, moody atmosphere, I do prefer to actually see the things over seeing nothing. But it's something every Gamecube fan and horror fan should experience at least once. I'd love to see it start gaining the same love people have for other titles from around the same time and see it replayed every Halloween by lots of people. But from doing this whole video, I can now understand why some just play it once and leave it at that. Maybe someday we will get a follow-up, a remaster, or anything in the same universe or style. Eternal Darkness is a sometimes flawed but fun horror experience, which will always be good enough for me. So that's it for this episode of RetroActive. I'd love to hear from everyone on their thoughts on Eternal Darkness. Did you play it at launch or later, and did you enjoy it or hate it? Leave me some comments, have a happy Halloween, and I'll see you next time. Hey, this is Kevin. Once again, thanking you so much for watching another episode of RetroActive. But if you liked it, please hit that like button, subscribe, leave a comment, all the stuff I'm supposed to say. And I also want to remind you that I do have a Ko-fi account and a Discord. Links will be in the description. Bye!